Newsfirst Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali.
And top of the morning to you. This is Newsline, live from the Newsfirst studios in Dawson Street in Colombo. And joining me as my guest this morning is Mr. Stefan De Silva. Almost a lifetime in the prison service, perhaps one of St. Thomas's College's most successful exports to Australia and in the service of Australia's prison system. Good morning to you, Stefan, and welcome to Newsline.
Thank you.
And thank you for being here. Stefan, in Sri Lanka, the prison service is under much focus right now because since we've had a change of government in 2015, there have been promises of accountability and responsibility, and we've had a number of, shall we say, in the PR world we'll say they are high profile, and they've been to the prisons and so on, and in remand, mainly in remand, and they all tend to go to the prison's hospital.
Okay.
How traumatic? You joined the Australian prisons in '78, and so you've got vast experience. How traumatizing is it to have a prison?
Well, for us, prison is not a good place to be. Okay, so prisons are an artificial, predatory, violent system. And so anybody who's high profile is a target for some lunatic who wants to make a name for himself or herself. It is a traumatic experience. It's not a good place to be. And it affects people, it affects staff equally, institutionalized. So prisons are perhaps a hidden soul of society. And society is equally responsible for the type of prison system you have. So it's very interesting. A lot of people will demand a harsher, tougher jail till their son or daughter, mother or father goes to prison. Then they want the Mother Teresa system to come in.
Right.
So it's a complex issue. It's highly politicized. It's highly charged, and it's somewhat evolutionary too. It changes as society and crime stats and all that changes. But short answer, it is a traumatic experience. It can be brutal. But on the whole, you put a bunch of people together who are recalcitrant or misfits.
Yeah. And they're all bad. That's why they're there.
That's right. And then society thinks that you throw this damage package over the wall, and 5 years later they come out a model citizen.
Right.
It doesn't exactly work like that. And but that's the perception.
And how does one change? How does one rehabilitate a prisoner?
But this is my opinion. I think at the end of the day for us, if a person wants to change, they will change. And by doing that, they will take advantage of what's on offer.
Right.
So prisons all around the world offer a variety of programs. And there is a social and a national context too, because what fits, for example, Sri Lanka may not fit in the UK or the USA. But at the end of the day, my belief is, based on my experience, because I've seen some of the worst change, because they come to a point in life where they said, I've had enough.
Right.
And you see this remarkable change. But that can take 20, 30 years of violence and and bad behavior.
Right.
So it can happen, but it's one of those issues that is never ending. And also, on the other hand, if you've got somebody who hasn't come to their point in life, to put that person on release back in the environment where shaped their behavior in the first place is counterproductive. So it's a complex issue. It's a social issue, and what we shouldn't do, and like some other countries do, is we shouldn't incarcerate our social problems. So it's an issue that society as a whole has a responsibility for,
And Stefan, Australia, does it have the death penalty?
No, I think it's now been banned.
Right.
It was suspended for a while. And so short answer is no.
Just as an aside, I seem to recall that maybe a year or so ago, or perhaps more, the Sri Lankan Prison Service advertised for the position of hangman. And I'm told that we had 2 applications from Australia.
I was not one of them. I'm surprised because the death penalty has been reconstituted here, right? If I'm not
we
mistaken.
technically have it, but we don't have, as far as I know.
Yeah.
And I have invited the Prisons Commissioner to come and share his experiences on this program. It's still under discussion. He hasn't ruled it out, but no, we have the death penalty, but it's I think fair to say that it's
suspended.
currently not implemented. So death row is growing all the time, I suppose.
You know, I mean, there are, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think the U.S. has executed or executes about 50 or 60 people a year, and there are various countries that still have the death penalty. But the death penalty hasn't stopped capital crime.
Right.
That's one of the arguments against the death penalty, that it hasn't stopped serious or, murder, for want of a better word.
What
right?
does I mean, you've been when you retired, you've had a mature career in prison service. Do you think, in your, you've obviously interacted with all sorts of convicts, murderers as well, I suppose. Do you think that they actually sit down and think, especially people who are convicted of murder, premeditated?
Yes.
Okay. So, do you think that they actually sit down and think, well, I might, be hanged for this? Do you think that ever plays a part in their consideration?
It probably depends on the individual. For us now, I've met people who are in for murder, and a lot of the murder is a one-off crime of passion, unless you have this, as you say, a premeditated murder or a group of people committing some horrific murders, right? It depends on the person, but if it's a crime of passion, there is a likelihood that the person does really regret. It happened in a flash, so on and so forth. But if you're looking at like a contract killer or something like that, their mindset is different, and fundamentally they're psychotic.
Right.
And I'm not sure, I haven't met anybody who's, sat down and contemplated the offense. They say they do.
Right.
In fact, I have never met an innocent man in jail in 36 years.
Oh, really?
Sorry, a guilty man. They're all innocent,
right?
Right? So there is that part of the spectrum too. And they always blame somebody else for their predicament. So, I've had this classic line which I've used before. The chap said to me once, he said, I only took the shotgun to the jail. He said, I didn't use it. Right. So I had to say to him, I take a ballpoint pen. You took the shotgun. That's where you're in here. I'm on the outside.
Yeah.
So, but to answer the question, I don't think most of them will contemplate the consequences unless it's a crime of passion.
I see.
You see? And but some of them are quite cold, or flawed human beings, and perhaps a degree of mental illness.
And what's the principal problems inside Australia's prisons?
For us, probably the biggest problem facing prisons across the globe today is overcrowding. Right? That it puts pressure on the system. It puts pressure on the inmates. If you have 2 or 3 in one cell, and this happens even in the systems I was in the jails I ran, overcrowding is an issue, but it's not a simple issue in the sense that if you build bigger jails, you fill them up. Like as we speak, there is about 2.3 million people in custody in the USA, right?
Yeah.
So building bigger jails is not the issue. You need a raft of changes in the criminal justice system, in your juvenile detention systems, social programs.
And you say overcrowding. So what happens? in practice, what happens? Do they get, if it's a cell designed for two, does the third person sleep on the floor?
They do.
Oh, really?
They do. And that causes all sorts of problems, sometimes four.
Oh, right.
So
it's not only in Sri Lanka that...
oh, absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Prisoners sleep on the floor.
Yeah. You know, the prison design is important, so you've got, even in Australia, we've closed most of them and we've gone on and I'm talking New South Wales, not necessarily Australia. There has been a modernization of facilities, right? So that's important too, because as your population grows, you need places where people can move around and, you know, get some exercise, so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, if you can imagine being locked in your toilet for 16, 17 hours a day, it's damaging. So basically that's what it is. A cell with a toilet is a bit like being locked in your bathroom.
Yeah.
So overcrowding has a huge impact on the tensions, behaviors, tensions on staff, between staff, cost, the whole bit. But it's to solve overcrowding in general, you need not necessarily build bigger jails, because if you build bigger jails, you tend to fill them up, and you don't fill them up with murders and rapists, you fill them up with poor, unfortunate, wretched souls who haven't had an opportunity in life, you know. And there's plenty of them.
What about, I know that when I've written copy on the prison system here, the availability, one inmate told me that he was an addict, and he said that the availability of drugs inside the system made his life much easier inside than it was outside.
I agree. They take drugs, I mean addiction, you'll hear this phrase from time to time of a drug-free prison. There's no such thing like that, right? Now you might get a drug rehab unit inside a prison. It's a very hard thing to control. Visitors, staff, you know, trafficking drugs is big money. And I suppose that's the root cause of all of it. So the treatment of drugs in jail is important. But again, the individual needs to have a firm commitment to overcome the addiction. And then that perhaps goes into a bigger problem for us. You know, if we treat addiction as a moral issue and not an illness, that has implications too.
Yeah.
And drug-related crime can fill up prisons. You know, your petty theft, housebreaking, all that sort of stuff, to support a habit. So drugs is a huge virus in society, right? And the battle continues.
But, you know, the people on the outside will say that it's the fault of the prison service, the guards there. They're either complicit in the smuggling in, or whichever way you look at it, it's their fault.
You will get bad apples, no question about it. I've investigated staff, we've caught staff, senior staff, trafficking at that time. Just
and they then ended up in the same place.
Not necessarily. I mean, some of them lose their job, some of them, but then it goes through the legal process, and then it gets.
Have you had any officers whom you've worked with who've been convicted and then
yes
ended in the inside?
Yeah, and we've had officers who have been implicit or complicit in getting people bashed up. So you get your bad apples, because the other interesting thing in this whole debate on prisons, it doesn't attract Rhodes Scholars into employment, right? So with the good comes the bad. There are a lot of good people who work tirelessly to rehabilitate prisoners and genuinely are interested. But with that comes your darker element. So I've had people charged with trafficking and assault, all sorts of things, and some of them were not a surprise because you could almost see it coming, but some were, you know.
But how safe are they inside? We in Sri Lanka we have the former president's son who is in remand, who went into remand yesterday. It is, I think, the second time in. How safe are these, let's call them VIPs? I don't really like that term, but anyway, you know, they have a certain standing and a certain security. And in this chap's case, his father's obviously the man who was president when the war was won, and acknowledged that played a key role in that. And so there must be an element of
There is,
danger.
for us, any person, high profile, notoriety or fame, when they come into the system, they are a target, right? They're a target for anybody who wants to make a name for himself. So now in Australia, in New South Wales, we have a system of protection. And it gets to be done really because we have people on protection from people on protection. So you
Right.
go to strict protection. But so you need to have a system where people who are of high profile or notoriety or whatever it is, who come into a prison, who are not assaulted or even killed, right? Because that element is there for certain now. I'm not sure what Sri Lankan prisons have, but unless they have a system where you can separate these people, and also there's a difference between separation and segregation. Segregation is a loss of privileges and rights and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But you need to separate certain categories of high-profile people. And in Sri Lanka, there is a class divide too. So it's probably a system where you need to make sure that the person who comes in doesn't get seriously hurt or killed. I've got no doubt about that. You know?
And in your time, you've had sort of, shall we call them dignitaries,
Yes.
or important chaps in there. And what did you give them special privileges?
But they're a distraction because I was thinking of one particular person who was a billionaire, and of course we've had other minor public officials to senior public officials being incarcerated. They're a distraction because they take up your time, so you focus on one person when you've got 1,000 people to look after. But you would probably be very careful before you gave them any special privileges, because again, the media scrutiny is intense. And so the short answer is no, but again, it's hard to say if for example, the person has a serious illness.
Yeah.
Like the person I'm thinking of he had suicidal tendencies, he had all sorts of breathing problems, all that sort of stuff. So you have to make sure that they survive the system, otherwise they'll be held to pay if something happens to them. But at the same time, you've got to tread this fine line between equality, you know.
Let's explore that fine line after this short break. Don't go away. This is, after all, Newsline. And welcome back to Newsline. It's good having you with us, and it's good having Stefan De Silva with us.
Thank you.
Althomian and former prisons official from Australia. Australia, by the way, with a significant Sri Lankan population, I think 0.5% of the total population of Australia.
Not sure.
That's the statistics I read some time ago. Out of 20 million, I think we've got.
Yeah, 21, I think.
Yes, we've got about 1 million there. How many Sri Lankan prisoners or people of Sri Lankan origin did you find in you whilst you were working?
And I was in New South Wales, and happy to say not many. There have been one or two,
Right.
and quite recently there's been a woman and another, I think it was a dentist who came into custody. But in proportion,
Yeah.
very few. I mean, hardly on the...
It doesn't
register on the
register.
Richter scale, yeah.
No.
It doesn't register.
And how do you cope? We imagine that the prisoners cope with great difficulty, but how do you cope? How does the prison's officials, the staff, cope with? You are as much institutionalized as they are.
It's a good question for us, because one of the issues that is missed in the debate on prisons is the impact on staff. So what I used to say to junior staff, and I was a training instructor for a few years, and my advice I would give recruits is, do not lose your outside group of friends, do not give up your hobbies, because as in most uniform codes, if you socialize with the same people and you go to work with the same people, eventually your world shrinks.
Right.
And the ideology, which can be distorted, becomes the norm. And they can be seriously flawed after that, you see. But staff do get institutionalized, so you have the inmates who get institutionalized, and you have staff who get institutionalized. And that's a poisonous mix, you know.
Stefan, corruption must be rampant. Well, corruption happens all over the world, I'm sure, on different scales. Can I ask you, without insinuating, I'm just ask you a straight question. How many times have you, has anyone approached you to do in an attempt to sort of bribe you in exchange for something or other that they want?
It's probably twice.
Right.
But I was a junior officer. The approach was to bring in, one was I think cigarettes and the other one was marijuana, but that's how subtle corruption can start.
Right.
So when I joined the job, you know, a letter was a big deal. A cigarette was a big deal.
It was way back in 78.
It's 78. And so what seems quite innocuous is, you know, you might, if you feel overly sympathetic and you say you bring in a letter, the next thing you know, they've got you. So because then they blackmail you, right? And it just escalates. And a lot of staff who have ended up with serious corruption charges started off with a cigarette, a letter, a phone call, or whatever. So have I been approached? Yes, but not at a senior level, because the systems and the checks and balances are quite complex.
And your sort of release, if you like, from
Parole.
From parole has been what? I see that you've got a book. You've become an author.
I have, but that's one of the elements that kept me from being institutionalized, is to have an outside hobby, and I had a passionate hobby.
Do you want to show us this book?
I'll show it to you, and I would like to gift it to you.
Oh, thank you very much.
So this is the latest book, which
The Isle of Mystique.
The Isle of Mystique, the Isle of Legend, and its theme is hidden places in Sri Lanka.
I see.
You know, there are so many stereotypical images of Sri Lanka since I was a boy.
Right.
You know, the beach with the palm trees and so on.
And the images in the book?
The images in the book is what I've taken over probably 3 years.
And you've taken the photographs?
I have, and
I think our network is looking for photographers.
Oh, what are they offering? But the theme of it is what I've called is Eclipse Sri Lanka, and Eclipse people too. So, and I'm getting some good feedback from those who have bought it, in the sense that the most common thing is, we've never heard of these places. And I said, that's the purpose of the book. So you get in your car and go over to these places.
Right.
But there's an exciting discovery in the book, which is some rock art which was discovered a mere 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Unlike anything we've seen in Sri Lanka. Very unusual, quite unique. And now there is some debate about it, and there is a couple of students who have done some work on it. And that's good news.
Stefan, you know, thank you for sharing your book with us. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Thank you. I'll ask you to sign it at some point.
Sure.
And thank you. What I want to say to you is corruption and so on within this prison system, is it controlled largely because the prison staff are looked after financially well, that they don't have to rely on doing a side deal and supplying cigarettes and so on?
For us, I mean, like comparatively, I suppose the the New South Wales prison officer is on a good basic wage. But in addition to that, you've got penalty rates, uniform supply. So, you know, there is a reduction in daily cost in dry cleaning, all that sort of stuff. So a good wage is important. But what you'll never stop is this human weakness for greed. You know, there is no panacea for greed. And it's, in fact, it's one of the things that you have a prisoner in for greed. The rehab programs are a bit difficult. If a person is a drug addict, you could probably fix that. Right. But greed is an issue. So whilst the good wage is important in increasing the majority of good staff, you will always have someone, or maybe a group, who will traffic for that extra money. Mobile phones. Big issue.
I was about to ask you, what's the biggest contraband item?
When I left, you know, we had 7, 10 phones come over the wall. We had an officer, a respected officer, caught with trafficking a mobile phone into maximum security, and then there was another officer in another maximum security jail who was...
So are prisoners not allowed to communicate with the outside world?
They can through the phone system, but the danger with the mobile phone is they can intimidate witnesses, they can organize escapes, they can threaten staff. So mobile phones are a huge problem, and all you need to do is smuggle the SIM in. And then
what about call blocking and so on?
I think New South Wales is just exploring that concept, or if they might be moving towards it. But one of the things that I went through, because I was involved in some of this exploration, is if you blanket a jail, the radius is you also affect the people around. So if somebody driving through has a heart attack and can't call 000, then you've got another problem. But mobile phones are an issue. It's a huge issue.
What kind of equipment do you all have in the prisons to detect contraband, like, let's say, drugs?
Dogs are a good weapon against the fighting drugs, and searches, body searches.
Can dogs detect narcotics that have been placed inside the abdomen, like somebody's swallowing it?
Dogs are extremely perceptive or sensitive to this, but I think it's the person handling the drugs, the residue. But the internal secretion of drugs is by far the most popular method, you might say, right? So drugs are an issue, and it's trafficked at all levels. You know.
Stefan, as we come to the end of Newsline, I'm going to read out to you a message that I've just received. An Australian Sri Lankan, to be admired, not forgotten his roots. There aren't many like him. And this is obviously...
I'm flattered.
You know, thank you, Stefan De Silva, for sharing your experiences with us. It's a pity that time's flown. But we'd be really interested to see, very quickly though, I can steal this in, what can you do? Can you do something to help the Sri Lankan prison system?
If I'm asked, yes. I've stayed away from it, but I think I've had a 2-year break in being retired, and perhaps I'm ready to take on. But working here would be very interesting because of the cultural, social context. It'd be different.
I hope that somebody's listening and takes note of this thing. Stefan De Silva, absolutely marvellous having you on the program.
My pleasure.
Thank you for watching, and we hope that you will have an excellent week ahead. And do tune in to Newsline, 7 to 7:30, Monday to Friday, only on TV1. Take care, and God bless.
Newsfirst, Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali.